As soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Here we find Jesus in the early morning hours after his late night arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives. His disciples, his friends, have deserted him. Simon, whom Jesus had renamed Peter because he was steadfast as a rock, this very same Simon Peter has 3 times denied even knowing Christ, much less being his disciple and his friend. Jesus stands alone before those who have ordered his arrest. We might be tempted to say that Jesus stands alone among his enemies, and in a sense he does. However, we needn't vilify the high priest and the Sanhedrin, for the whole fallen world has set itself against Jesus, as the Gospel according to John tells us. The fallen powers and principalities, death and hell, these are the enemies arrayed against Christ. As the apostle reminds us in the epistle to the Ephesians, he was not contending against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Of course, this curse of fallenness, is not limited to those spiritual enemies of Christ only. It can also be found in the souls of us, flesh and blood mortals, making each and all of us Christ's enemies as well. We carry this curse in the very flesh of our bodies like a fetter. We've been taught to call this curse and this fetter sin. We are enslaved by sin. And by this bondage we are bound to be enemies of Christ, enemies of the one who loved us into being, into existence, bestowing upon us life by his divine love, and who will love us to death, his death, by which he will free our souls from this bondage of sin and this body of death, and give us new life. So yes, Christ is alone among his enemies, for all are set against him. The high priest, yes, but also Peter. The Sanhedrin, yes, but also the 12. The crowd, yes, but also the disciples. Pontius Pilate, yes, but also you and me. Jesus is no more alone among his enemies when he stands before the Sanhedrin than he is when he sits at table with his disciples. So we should not, indeed we cannot, identify the high priest and the Sanhedrin as the villains of this story. Nor would we be right and true in thinking of them as especially sinful or especially evil. Indeed, whatever their faults in life, this elite council of Jerusalem Sadducees and a few Pharisees were probably doing what they could to mitigate a bad situation. They knew that the prefect, the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, had no interest in the well-being of the Judeans he governed, and no respect for Jewish culture and faith. As a show of dominance, Pilate would retain the priestly vestments and require the high priest Caiaphas to come to him before Passover or the high holy days, hat in hand as it were, to request the vestments he needed to perform his sacrificial duties as high priest. But that little indignity was nothing compared to Pilate's penchant for making recourse to widespread, indiscriminate violence in response to even the slightest civil unrest. So they hand over Jesus, the man who had caused a small ruckus in the temple days before, when he overturned the tables of the money changers. And in doing so, they surely hoped to avoid the bloodshed Pilate was ready to release upon a Jerusalem filled to overflowing with pilgrims. As John's Gospel reports Caiaphas saying, "It's better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish." Jesus, for his part, goes along with the high priest's bid. He remains silent in his summary hearing before the prefect. In this he is like the suffering servant of the book of the prophet Isaiah. He will not give Pilate any cause for violence against his disciples, against the crowd, or even against the high priest and the Sanhedrin. In his silence, Jesus takes upon himself the violence that would be doled out upon the people. But more than that, he takes on the cosmic violence of the fallen powers and principalities, who are our taskmasters in this bondage of sin. In his silence before the earthly power of the Roman Empire personified in Pontius Pilate, Jesus confronts the spiritual power of the ruler of this world, the prince of the power of the air, and his hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. In his silence, Jesus confronts the deafening cacophony of sin and death and hell, and he takes it upon himself. No one will die for his sake, but Jesus will die for the sake of all.